Congressional hearings this week again about how we should reform Wall Street and whether we should have a consumer protection agency. Let's get some insights now from the man who would be senator from Connecticut, Peter Schiff, president of Euro Pacific Capital and author of Crash Proof 2.0. Peter, so you've announced you're running for Senate. Generally speaking, what would you do to reform Wall Street that you're not seeing being done right now in terms of discussions being had in Congress?
Yeah, first of all, to assume that Wall Street is underregulated is absurd. I mean, I own a brokerage firm, right? So I'm in this for a living, and I can tell you that the regulations are onerous. In fact, if the regulations that are in place today were in place when I started my firm, I never could have afforded to get it going. And most of the regulations that exist that are either imposed through FINRA, which the U.S. government requires us to join, or through the SEC, do not benefit at all the investors. You know, almost nothing benefits the investors. It's all useless, meaningless regulation that is very expensive and cumbersome to enforce. So we don't need more regulation. This crisis is not about not enough regulation. Right? This is the most heavily regulated. We need market regulations. We need to understand how the government and how the Federal Reserve created this crisis, a crisis that if markets were allowed to work, never would have happened.
How do you get people to vote for you when you basically say, look, it's not the SEC's fault. You were just dumb. You made a stupid loan, or you bought a house you shouldn't have bought. That's your problem. It's not the SEC. I mean, there are a lot of people who agree with that, but that's not generally the way you get people to vote for you.
But why were it that why were they able to make so many foolish decisions? Because the Federal Reserve had interest rates too low. If it wasn't for the ability to get a teaser rate, most people wouldn't have got in over their head. But the Fed force-fed this cheap money into the system. You know, and so, you know, I've said before that if a kindergarten teacher, you know, passes out soda pop and pixie sticks and then leaves the classroom and comes back at the end of the day and kindergarten kids have wrecked the classroom, right, who do you blame? You know, once the Federal Reserve injected all this cheap money, you know, foolish decisions are going to be made. And, of course, a lot of it had to do with the moral hazards. When you have entities like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guaranteeing mortgages, right? Now people are able to buy homes that they can't afford because the lenders don't care if they can pay the money back because they know the government will. We need a situation where individuals are limited by their own creditworthiness so that if somebody wants to buy a house, they have to prove they can afford it. And if that's the case, then they're not going to make these stupid decisions. Because even if the home buyer is that reckless, the lender won't be because he doesn't want to lose his money.
All right, so let's talk about the race. You've entered the race for Senate. You're serious about this, and I don't say that facetiously. You're serious about this. What is it about Senator Dodd that you think you find such fault with that you think you should replace him?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think one of the biggest problems in Washington is that people make a whole career out of being in politics. And Chris Dodd has been in the Senate for 30 years, and he was in the House of Representatives for 6, and before that he was in law school. So he's never really worked in the private sector. He doesn't know what it's like to run a business. He doesn't know what it's like to live with the regulations he passes. And his father was a senator. His whole life, you know, it's like a hereditary title for him. So, you know, I think we need more citizen legislatures. I think we need people to go to Washington who don't really want to be there, who actually want to do some civic duty, who actually want to do some public service. So I want people who interrupt their careers, go to Washington, stay there for a while, and then leave, go back to the private sector, and let somebody else come in. So that's number one. But number two, specific to Dodd, is Dodd was one of the major factors in helping to create these problems. I mean, he's the one that protected Freddie and Fannie from regulation. Now, normally, I'm against regulation. But in circumstances like Freddie and Fannie, where the entities have a government guarantee, well, now we need regulation because the government removed all the market regulation.
But they had an unfair advantage over any creditors.
Fannie and Freddie, I mean, we talk about the leverage of Bear Stearns or Lehman. I mean, that's nothing compared to the leverage of Fannie and Freddie, right? They were the most leveraged institutions in the history of the world. Why did they get so leveraged up? Because of the government guarantee. And they wouldn't have been so leveraged up if Chris Dodd hadn't blocked every opportunity to rein them in. Now, why did Chris Dodd do that? Well, because he was the biggest recipient of donations from Freddie and Fannie of any elected official. So he basically was on the take of the people he was regulating. And, you know, and I think, you know, if you go back to the moments before Freddie and Fannie's failure, this guy was on television talking about how sound they were. And I was on television on the same day saying they were going bankrupt. And I've been saying that for years. So I think I match up very well against him. He's the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. Yeah, obviously he is clueless about banking. He's clueless about real estate. He doesn't know anything about the industry that he's trying to regulate. and his incompetence helped create this problem.
You mentioned Christopher Dodd's father. I have to ask you, your father was famously opposed to the IRS and wanted to abolish income taxes. Do you share that point of view? Are you going to run on that kind of thought?
Ideally, I'd like to abolish the income tax. I'd like to abolish the Federal Reserve, but I have to be practical on what I can do. And the problem with trying to abolish the Federal Reserve is, fine, what are they going to replace it with? I don't want to take the printing press away from Ben Bernanke and then give it to Nancy Pelosi. She might do an even worse job. So the first thing is maybe to reform the Fed, kind of restore the independence that it used to have, because it's very political right now, and take away its mandate to try to grow the economy, which it can't do anyway by printing money. We got to make it focused on maintaining the value of our money. So I'd like to reform the Fed. I don't like the Fed setting interest rates. I don't think interest rates, they should just guess, pick them out of a hat. I want the market setting interest rates. Because when you let the Fed do it, they do it for political reasons. Obviously, look, interest rates are 1%, right? Zero.
Yeah.
Can anybody think that that's the real rate? That interest rates should be zero, money should be free? Of course not. And you have to understand all the damage done to a market-based economy when something as basic as interest rates are wrong. It sends false economic signals. It makes us do foolish things, and it screws up the economy. So we have to reform the Fed. As far as the income tax is concerned, look, the income tax is probably one of the most destructive taxes that we have. I mean, what do you do as an income tax? You tax people for working. You tax them for being productive. We don't want to discourage that. We want to encourage that. So we don't want to tax people when they produce. We want to tax them when they consume. Let's tax them when they spend their money, not when they earn their money. Because when they earn their money, that's when they're growing the economy. That's when they're producing products, providing services, providing employment opportunities. So I'd like to, shrink the income tax or abolish the income tax, but I understand that we can't do that until we shrink government. A lot of people run in the Republican Party promising tax cuts, and I would love tax cuts. But I understand that you can't have tax cuts without spending cuts, because otherwise it's a lie. If you just cut taxes but increase the deficit, all you're doing is increasing future taxes or increasing current inflation. I don't want to do that. I want to shrink government. I want to make it a lot smaller so it doesn't cost as much, so we don't need all those tax revenues. And when we don't need them, then we can cut taxes in an honest way.
So quickly, can you win with a message that says, you know what, I'm not going to just sugarcoat everything. We're going to give it, and we're going to get the cure to the disease, but it's going to be painful to do it. Can you win with that?
I hope so, because if we don't do this, then then we're through. I mean, this country is going to be a complete mess if we don't change course in Washington. And I think the American people are willing to do the right thing if they actually understand what's going on and realizing it's not that bad. I mean, do we really have to keep buying stuff? I mean, we have closets full of clothes. We have all kinds of furniture. I mean, we don't need to buy more stuff.